Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tegan McKim. I'm with SCORE Palm Beach County, and I'm so glad you could join us this afternoon. Just a little bit about SCORE before we get started. SCORE is a nonprofit and a resource partner of the Small Business Administration, and our mission is really to foster small businesses by giving everyone the support that they need to thrive as a small business owner. So some of you, that being said, some of you joining us today may already be working with someone. Maybe you've met with a mentor in the past. We have a network of over 10,000 volunteers throughout the country. And in our chapter alone for Palm Beach County area, we have a little over 70 business experts. So you can find help in just about any industry that you're looking for in any area of expertise. So if you are interested in meeting with a mentor, you can go to our website, which is in my virtual background here, which is palmbeachcounty.score.org. And you can click the Find a Mentor button, or you can also reach out directly to me. My email address is in my name, which is tegan.mckim@scorevolunteer.org. So you can reach out to me also to be matched with a mentor. So we are so excited to have Kathy here today. Kathy is president and CEO of eSilo, which is an offsite data backup company, and it makes it possible for businesses to proactively avoid data loss and then thereby avoid business downtime. In addition to being a business mentor, and she's a subject matter expert in technology here at SCORE, she's also on the board of directors for the Tech Hub South Florida. Is that correct? Their new name change?
Yes,
Right.
we recently rebranded.
Yeah. Okay, so with that, and they're actually a partner of our office as well. So I think that's a very cool connection. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kathy. So thank you again for joining us for part 1 of how to protect your small business from IT and cyber attacks, which is basic data security for startups and entrepreneurs. All right.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tegan, for that warm welcome and introduction. So I have a bunch of interactive slides here. I did mention before, but I would love if you guys could participate and give me a little bit of feedback as we go through this. You know, we're not a huge group, so I really want to make sure that this presentation is all about you and what you want to learn. So if you can type some comments in the chat and share those with not just the panelists, but also the attendees. It's nice. I know when I'm a participant in a webinar, it's nice to see what other people are asking and saying and doing, and it kind of brings us together. So with that, I did want to start with a little icebreaker. So in the chat box, if you could just share your name, your business name, if you already have one, or if not, maybe the area, the idea that you have for your business, and why you're here. What made you want to join this session today, and what you're hoping to get out of it. So I'll give you a moment just to type that into the chat, and we will get started here in just a second. All right. While we're waiting for everybody to type their comments, I do want to start off with a couple of interactive questions. So it's always helpful for me to know who I'm talking to and kind of where you guys are coming from. So the first question is whether you're a digital native or a digital immigrant. And if you're not sure what that means, the next couple of slides will help you out. But if you could just drop a 1 in the chat if you identify with being more of a digital native, or a 2 if you identify with being a digital immigrant, and that'll kind of flow through for the subsequent slides, that would just really help me get a feel for where you guys are coming from. So a digital native is someone who grew up surrounded by technology. So oftentimes I'll tell you that, you know, I have small kids. Tegan and I were just talking about them earlier. They know almost as much, they know how to do almost as much on the phone as I do. So they're very comfortable with technology in their school, and when they get to the workforce, they will be, I think, phenomenal, right? Kids of that generation. Whereas a digital immigrant is someone who entered the business world when not everything was digital. So they've had to adapt and learn along the way. And it means that they are maybe less comfortable with all aspects of technology. Now, the other things that I wanted to know is, what's your style of managing your IT or your technology? Do you like to do it yourself? You want to learn, you want to figure it out? And also for a lot of startups, right, this is the most logical place to begin, is you do things yourself until you're larger and can hire somebody. Or are you somebody who recognizes what your strengths and weaknesses are and maybe are inclined to hire out for that activity? And I see Leanne's comments and Michelle, awesome, thank you guys. I see some 1s. So that's great. Hi, Brian. All right. So then, do you see technology as helping you streamline your business, right? Making things faster, making them more efficient, giving you new ways to connect with your customers? Or do you see technology as being a barrier, something that holds you back, something that makes things maybe overly complex? And then lastly, do you see technology as an opportunity for offense? Or do you focus more on the concerns and the pitfalls and where things could go wrong? So your attention is more geared towards defense. So I'm just going to read through the comments here. I see a bunch of digital natives. And by the way, being a digital native or a digital immigrant doesn't have anything to do with age, although the pictures might have suggested that. A lot of it just has to do with how much technology you're accustomed to using in your personal life and how that carries over into your business. I see someone is interested in learning about WordPress hacking and how to stop that. So I know that that's a big problem for people. And then also somebody else is saying they're an aspiring entrepreneur. They love technology and they see technology as a great asset. So that's a perfect segue to this, which is technology can be your greatest assets or one of them if managed properly, but if managed improperly can also be one of your greatest weaknesses. And so when you think about technology that's running well, right, well protected, efficient, it's going to help you move faster, sell more, really innovate and disrupt the competition, right, in your space, and ultimately help you increase brand loyalty. As you have more stickiness with your customers, you're communicating with them where they live, where they are through multiple touch points. And ultimately that leaves you more money, more freedom, greater confidence, greater peace of mind in your business. But when not managed well, technology can become your weakest link. So you can have business downtime when systems aren't functioning properly. If you have a cyber attack, that leads to operational disruptions and ultimately lost customers, lost confidence, and lots of time, energy, and money spent recovering and getting things back to the way that they were. Ultimately, you have an erosion of brand trust and reputation. And multiple studies have been done around how important trust is, especially for small businesses, right? So especially if you're in finance, accounting, law, insurance, your clients expect you to know how to handle their data. But even if you're not, right, they want to know that they're dealing with somebody who's savvy, who understands how to secure their information, and who is going to be there for them when they need them. So in today's session, we're going to go over 3 main ideas. Why I believe you're going to need to rethink your data security when it comes to your business, and why the tactics you may have used as an individual or as a consumer to secure your information may not be the best fit for a business environment. We'll also cover some simple do's and don'ts, so ways to help avoid data loss, scams, and other cyber attacks. And then we'll go over what I at least believe is the single most important thing you can do to ensure your business can recover quickly from any kind of an IT disaster, whether that's a cyber attack or just a run-of-the-mill hard drive failure, computer failure. And this is part 1 of a 3-part series. So we'll touch a lot of these topics at a surface level, but then we'll go much deeper into them in parts 2 and then parts 3. So before we dive in, I wanted to tell you a little bit about myself and why you should be listening to what I have to say around cybersecurity. It's always a natural question. So my professional background, as Tegan mentioned, I own a company called eSilo, and we offer data protection cybersecurity services to businesses all around the country. I'm also part of Tech Hub South Florida and a mentor. But I think that the piece we haven't talked about yet is that I spent the first 14 years of my career at GE. So large Fortune 10 company, we had multiple business lines in multiple industries, in crazy places all over the world. And this is just a snapshot of all the different places that I lived and worked while I was at that company. And so what it showed me was how you run technology in a large enterprise with a seemingly infinite budget and almost infinite level of resources, and what great security and what great technology looks like. And so now in my current role, I'm bringing those best practices to small businesses to see what makes the most sense. Not everything that an enterprise does is going to make sense for your small business, but there are definitely some core elements that every business should have in place. And similarly, as I was going through all of that, those assignments and that work at GE, I faced off with a lot of different regulatory bodies, both in the financial services sector, healthcare, and others. And in the alphabet soup of regulation, there's a lot of verbiage and details and specific requirements. But when it comes to technology, if you peel all of that back, the underlying controls that they're looking for are very much the same. And that's good control over your accounts and passwords, patched software, and firewalls and antivirus, and many of the basic things that we're going to talk about today. So it's really not as complex as it might seem on the surface. So diving into why the tools that you may have been using as a consumer might not be good enough for your small business, I want to start with a real life story. So last year I attended a virtual security conference where a penetration tester was telling some stories about clients that he's worked with. And a penetration tester is somebody who is an ethical hacker. They are very skilled in breaking into systems, but they don't do it for malicious reasons. They do it as a proactive security service. So large companies hire them to essentially test their defenses and attempt to break in, and then the company has an opportunity to plug all of the gaps and holes before a real life attacker comes and exploits them. So this penetration tester was telling us a story about a large company that had ransomware, and that ransomware was distributed through a malicious attachment. So just to pause for a moment and go through some definitions. Ransomware is malicious software or bad software that encrypts all of the data on your device, so scrambles it so you can't read it anymore, and then holds it for ransom. So if you've read anything in the news, you'll see there's been a large number of ransomware attacks, and they've been on the rise all through the course of 2020. And oftentimes these demands can be several thousand or hundred thousands of dollars, even several $1 million, usually in a cryptocurrency that's hard to trace like Bitcoin. And then one of the most popular ways that ransomware spreads, or really any type of malware or virus spreads, is through malicious email attachments. So unsuspecting users are sent an email, and maybe it says something like, here's your invoice, or here's the receipt for the package that you're going to receive. And being the curious humans that we are, we click on the attachment, open it up, and it infects our machine with malware. So that's how this company got ransomware. A malicious attachment came through, but it was sent to all company employees. And so as more people clicked on the email over the course of the days, right, it didn't get identified by security right away and recalled. The ransom demand kept going up and up and up, and more machines were being infected, their data being encrypted, and then ultimately the damage to the business was increasing as well. So what did they do? They were smart. They hired a security firm. But before that security firm was able to begin the cleanup exercise, they needed to gather forensic evidence both for the insurance company and for law enforcement. So if you ever do get a ransomware attack or any kind of malware, we always recommend that you report it to law enforcement. And the reason for that is the more visibility that the FBI and others have into these types of attacks, the better they can triangulate their efforts in an attempt to catch the perpetrators. And so this company in particular had cybersecurity insurance, and so they were planning to make a claim both for business interruption as well as potential offsetting of costs for the ransom payment itself, the forensic investigation costs and fees, as well as any breach notification costs or other legal matters that may result from this incident. And so quick little side note, if you don't have or have never done any research into cybersecurity insurance, it's something that I recommend every small business owner consider. And there's different types of policies, different types of coverages, but it will help you offset all of those types of costs that I mentioned. And you don't have to be a technology company to need or to want cyber insurance. If you conduct any transactions through the computer, which is most of us these days, and if you store data electronically, it is worth looking at cyber insurance coverage. So with that, we'll move on. So in this example, the security company started to build a parallel network to begin rebuilding PCs. So while the original machines were being, evidence was being gathered from them, they stood up a second network and started to cleanse machines or onboard new machines, right? So installing Windows and installing basic programs so that when they were ready, they would be in a good position to restore their data from backup and get the employees back to work. But what they found was that as they were rebuilding machines and putting them on the clean network, they were getting infected again and again. And it happened twice. So now this is 3 infections, the original one and then 2 rebuilds. And they're sitting there scratching their head going, what is going on? Only to discover that the technician who was doing the cleansing and the rebuilding, his machine had also been hacked. So it just goes to show you that even experienced technology companies still struggle to get malware completely out of an environment. And this software is just so sophisticated and so persistent that you really have to be adaptive to respond to it. So at this point, 5 days had already passed, but they finally got to the point, 5 days had passed and the ransom demand was up to $800,000. And they didn't want to pay. And they were finally in a position to attempt to restore their servers from their backups. So great, right? Lost a little bit of productivity, but they're going to be able to get all their data back and get back to work. But of course, they ran into 2 problems. Murphy's Law would tell you that anything that can go wrong will, and that certainly happened in this case. So their first issue was that their backups were okay. So the files themselves were fine, but the database that organized those backups and told you what piece of information was stored where had been affected by the ransomware. So when thinking about what the lessons learned are from this, you can keep your backups off network, but if not every component of your backup infrastructure is protected in a way where it can't be corrupted, then your backups may not serve you in the way that you expect them to in the end. And the analogy that I would draw for kind of what this issue means is if you think about a filing cabinet, right? And you have all your paperwork filed in different folders and labeled and organized so you can find it all. In this scenario, they had all of their data, but everything was disorganized. Things were in the wrong folder. They didn't know how to find anything. That's essentially what happened to them in this scenario, right? The backups were there, but they couldn't index them and find what they needed. Then the second issue they had was that their backup software was too old. So when they rebuilt their servers, they had installed Windows Server 2019, right? Why would you install anything other than the latest? But the software that they had used for their backups was older, and it was originally installed on Windows 2008. So there were many drivers and different components that were no longer compatible with Windows 2019. So they had to go and rebuild that server again in order to attempt the backup recovery. So pro tip here is maintain your backup software. You might ask yourself, well, if I buy a license and it keeps working, why would I pay more money to update that software or that license in the future? And the reason is compatibility. So the tech world is changing so fast. Operating systems are evolving so quickly that if you don't maintain your software, and this isn't just for backup software, this is any kind of software, you run the risk of running into a situation where the platform that you want to be on isn't compatible with some of your legacy software, and then therefore you can't access the data created by that legacy software. The other way around this is to keep a backup of your backup environment. That way, their old Windows 2008 server, they could restore that and the software and the data all in one as part of their recovery procedures. So unfortunately, they didn't do that. So they were in a jam. And they did pay the ransom. They were able to negotiate it down to $175,000, but nevertheless, that's certainly not cheap. But in addition to the direct out-of-pocket money that they lost over a week's worth of work. Employees were still getting paid. So you also had kind of money going out, but no new money coming in. We spent a lot of time, months of cleanup after the fact. And of course, this affected their customers and their partners' confidence in the company. And the kicker is that, once you pay the ransom, and just because you get your data back doesn't mean that the bad guys won't come back in a day, in a week, in a month, and extort you for money again. So they had to spend a lot more money to invest in new security systems, new preventative controls to ensure that they were in a position to block and prevent these types of attacks in the first place. So the takeaway here is that IT solutions cost money, and business owners always want to defer those investments or find a reason why they don't think it's necessary to make that investment right now because they don't think that they're going to get hacked. But I promise you that if and when it happens to you, you will find the money after the fact. And it is often 10 times more costly to address an issue after the fact than to prevent it in the first place. So I'm a huge believer in an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And so I'm going to contrast that big business story with one that I think is going to be a lot more relatable to this group. So the same penetration tester also told us this story about a small company that got hacked. It was a husband and wife team. They were independent insurance brokers. So affiliated with a larger company, but not in a way where that larger company was providing them with secure laptops, security tools, really, any kind of that infrastructure. They were responsible for that on their own. And I'm curious to know what you think that husband and wife team's annual cybersecurity budget was. You can drop that in the chat. Close to zero. I see Michelle said zero. $100. It was basically zero. And as a rule of thumb, we would tell you that, especially in the financial services and insurance space, but even broadly speaking for other types of businesses, you want to spend 5 to 6% of your annual revenue on an IT budget. And then within that IT budget, 10% of it should be spent on security. And that's going to help you proportionally plan your investments. So unless this company, and they were small, but unless this company was only making $20,000 a year, which as insurance brokers, I know that's virtually impossible, and they were an established company, it's not like they had just started out, they were grossly underspending on their cybersecurity. And why? Because the owner didn't think they were big enough to attract hackers. And so that's a common misperception, that just because we're small, there's no reason why a hacker would attack us. And I think that that's rooted in a belief that all cyber attacks are humans sitting in front of keyboards, doing research and targeting companies that have, fat bank accounts and lots of really valuable information to steal. When in reality, like many other financial crimes, it's often a crime of opportunity. So in the way that if you left the doors to your car unlocked in the parking lot or forgot to lock the front door to your home, it's only a matter of time before somebody comes by and jiggles the lock and finds out, oh, this one's open, and helps themselves to whatever they're able to access. And so the same is true for the internet. There are a lot of automated scanners and bots that spend all day long churning the internet, searching for unpatched holes, unmitigated vulnerabilities, weak passwords, things like that allow them a door to worm their way in. And so the second misconception is that if I don't have a lot of data that's really valuable on the black market, then I might not be targeted. And I would tell you that that's wrong, because even if the data isn't particularly valuable, so even if you don't have a lot of sensitive information on clients or patients or partners, the data is valuable to you. And as a small business owner, you don't have a lot of working capital cushion. So they know that if they were to take your data and hold it hostage where you couldn't access it, no matter how innocent that data might be, you'd be willing to pay a decent amount of money to get it back. And often small businesses, because they don't have the same level of resources or expertise to both prevent these types of attacks, but also get rid of these attacks, clean them up themselves, small business owners are very likely to pay. So the other thing that I think went wrong in this story is that the business was only using free antivirus. And I think it's a great example of how tools that are adequate in your personal life, when you're just a consumer, behaving as a consumer, browsing the web, doing very kind of mundane things, don't really serve you well in a business context where you have a lot on the line and your day-to-day revenue and reputation really depends on it. So any guess what it cost them to recover from this attack? How much they spent to get everything cleaned up and do breach notification to all of their clients, since insurance companies do have social security numbers and sensitive financial information on their customers. All right, so somebody says $2,000, $25,000, keep going. Definitely not $500. $40,000 is what they spent to get everything in order. So you just look at the contrast, right? Ounce of prevention equals more than a pound of cure. All right, so let's get to it. So to underscore the point, your needs as a business are different than your needs as an individual. And I want to look at this on a spectrum. So on the left-hand side, you've got, really basic needs. And as an individual consumer, you probably sit over there. And then if you contrast that on the other side of the spectrum, you've got businesses who are maybe running an office, have multiple employees, lots of infrastructure to protect. And those are kind of the two bookends. You may think that, all right, well, if a business is hiring employees or contract workers, right, the more people you have, that tends to put you more on the advanced side of the scale, which is true. And that as a solopreneur, you look more like an individual consumer because maybe it's just you, maybe you're just getting started. And what I would tell you is that the fact that you're running a business alone, whether you're a solopreneur or you're at the stage where you have team members and you're starting to really grow, you are more towards the right hand side of that spectrum than you believe. And that's purely because of the nature of the data that you have, the criticality of that data to your day-to-day operations and ability to transact. So just like we would contrast your home router versus a business router, right? If I just pick that as an example, on the consumer side, we're going for basic functionality at the lowest possible cost, right? Manufacturers know that when you're standing in the aisles at Best Buy, you just want the cheapest thing that's going to perform the function as intended. And that gets reflected in the warranty on the product and in the quality of components that are built in that piece of equipment. Whereas for business use, the priority is a balance of cost, but also reliability and quality. You usually are going to get better components, better security options and configurations, and better warranties, which reflect the manufacturer's point of view on what's the expected lifespan of that piece of equipment. So just like not all cars are the same, right? Some are geared towards different things. Whether you care about fuel efficiency or transporting your family or using it for heavy duty work, technology is not all the same either. So I just grabbed these screenshots from Amazon, and they're all for 2 terabyte hard drives. And you might think on the surface, all right, well, and I'm just using this as an example, but this applies to really anything and everything in technology when you're shopping around and making investments. But you might think, all right, well, if one costs $50 and one costs $100, I want the one that costs $50. But what you don't necessarily realize if you're not a technology professional, you don't know how to interpret all the tech speak on there, the tech specs, is they have vastly different performance characteristics, different manufacturers' warranties, different quality components inside, and are actually engineered for very different use cases. So kind of like how a little hatchback, an electric hatchback is great for an individual. It's not great for a family of 4 or 5 or 6, whereas, for a family like that, you might want a minivan. Same principle applies here. So if you just want basic storage for your PC, a blue drive is going to work great. If you are a photographer or videographer, if you have a lot of media or marketing files, then you're going to want something that's geared towards redundant data storage, which in this case is the red drive. And if you're a gamer, right, you need high performance, that would be black. And if for us, right, we're a business that runs on data, we only do data center quality drives that are gold. So again, just to illustrate the point that not everything that looks the same on the surface really is when you peel back the layers. And one of the reasons for that is in your business, there's so much more that you have to protect and consider. So as an individual, it's your personal data, your family, the most important and sensitive information is probably your taxes. Within your business, though, you've got proprietary information, intellectual property, whether that's your own or maybe something that you have licensed and are contractually obligated to protect on behalf of others. You've also got your employee data, so social security numbers, payroll information, even performance-related information is considered highly sensitive and must be protected at a higher level of security requirements. And then, of course, your clients and partners, the ones who trust you to protect their information and who willingly give it to you to safeguard. And so security isn't just a defensive posture, but it can be a competitive advantage as well, right? If your clients see you as being smarter and more savvy about their data security than the next guy, then who, if everything else was equal, who would they choose to work with? I know that I want my accountants and lawyers and other trusted business advisors to be people who really understand security because that's important to me. So when you think about data, there's a couple of different broad categories of sensitive data, and we're not going to go into it in a ton of detail, but I did want to at least give you guys an overview. So SPII, or sensitive personally identifiable information, is the highest level of sensitivity for data, and it has very strict requirements for how that data must be protected depending on what industry you're in, what regulations might apply to your business, and in some cases also which states your customers reside in. There are different requirements there. Then there's proprietary information. So these might be your trade secrets, copyrighted material, intellectual property, competitive information, the things that if they were to get out there into the universe, they could cause your company significant competitive harm. And then everything beyond that is important to safeguard, but not necessarily going to be as impactful. So we've got this broad category of internal data. So that's just stuff that shouldn't really be out there for anyone in the public domain to know about, but might be a business directory or some unpublished marketing material. And then, of course, public data that's out there for everyone. So this slide has a couple of examples of those things that I just talked through. But as a general rule, you want to treat the SPII as the data with the highest sensitivity, and the fewest number of people should have access to it. So in the IT world, you'll hear the concept of least privilege, which basically means that for the most sensitive data, you only want people who must have access to that data to perform their job duties to be able to access it. Not everybody needs to have access to everything. And in small businesses with small teams, that can sometimes be a little bit tricky, where if you don't have good separation of duties between whoever's doing your books versus your sales versus your marketing versus your customer service, you have everybody who potentially has access to everything, and that might be more than what any one individual needs. But then as you go down, it's kind of like a pyramid. So internal data, almost everyone can have access to. It's not quite as sensitive. Now, according to the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, and that's the governing body that is responsible for enforcement of data privacy and data protection regulation in the US, they say that for any business, your measure of data security for how you protect personal information must be reasonable. And so that leaves a lot of room for interpretation. So what I would tell you is that if you were to experience a data breach and then were to say that, hey, I was using a free version of antivirus, probably not going to go over well. That's probably not a reasonable expectation for a business. And so when considering reasonableness, you should look at the volume and sensitivity of the information that you have access to, and whether that's what you're storing in your systems, what you're creating through the course of business, or which you can access from maybe a partner's systems or from someplace else, right? The totality of the information that you have access to. The size and the complexity of your business operations is another factor. And then lastly, and I think this for small businesses, this is the most important piece, it's the cost of the tools to address the vulnerabilities. So again, picking on antivirus as an example, you can use something that's free that came from your cable provider or with the new laptop that you just bought, or for $10 a month, you could get a much better, much more robust set of tools that will often include web browsing protection, adware protection, some other capabilities as well. So unless the tools are unreasonably expensive, then it would be worth it to look at business plans for many of the things that we'll talk about in this session. So before I move on to the next section, I just want to pause in case there are any questions in the chat. Let me just go through. All right. So we'll keep up. Tegan, is there anything else in the Q&A?
Nope, I don't have anything. Sorry, I didn't realize my camera was off.
Okay. Not a problem. All right. So when prioritizing investments in technology, there's a hierarchy of needs to keep in mind. And so how many of you are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs? It's a theory of human motivation that basically says human beings need food, water, shelter, their physiological needs met before they have any mental capacity to worry about things that are higher up in the pyramid. So once you have food, water, and shelter, then you can worry about things like personal safety, like your health, like having and managing property, having a job. And then you need those basics met before you can focus on relationships and then self-esteem, and then up at the very top, kind of becoming all that you can be, maximizing your full potential. In the business world, and for IT, I think there's a similar hierarchy of needs, where when you start at the very bottom, you just need basic food and water, right? You need systems that are on and that work, period. But once you have that basic need met, you can then start to focus on the security of those systems and that data. Can you trust the output? Is it serving you and your clients by protecting that information? And then as you move up the stack, how can technology help to streamline your business operations, make you more efficient, save you money? Ultimately, how does it help you grow and reach new clients and serve them in different ways? And then at the very, very top, how can you use tech to disrupt your industry and your competition the way Airbnb and Uber and many others have? And I would say that in a lot of the marketing material and a lot of communication that I see that's aimed at small business owners, it's focused on the green and the blue bars in the chart, right? How some cool new marketing tactic, or hey, go develop a new website, new mobile app, right? Ways to reach your clients, but not necessarily with much of any focus on the foundation of the pyramid. And just like you would never build a house on a shaky foundation, you shouldn't build your business on one either. So when we think about the combination of availability and security, so the first two rungs of that pyramid, it's important to look at this on a four blocker. And I'm a very visual thinker, so I love these types of four blockers, where on the horizontal axis, you've got the criticality of the data, right? How important is it to secure, either because of its impact to your business if you lose it, or because of regulatory expectations imposed by outside parties on what would happen if you lost it. So that's the x-axis. And then on the y, or the vertical axis, it's, well, how important is this to your operations day to day? Could you transact tomorrow if you lost access to this information? And so the example that I would use is for employees, you have social security numbers and bank account information to make payroll. So really sensitive, really important to secure. So on the right-hand side of the chart, but on a day-to-day basis, unless it's a payroll day, it's not that critical to operations. Maybe not as critical as your customer list, your transaction history, your inventory. So mapping out your data on a chart like this helps you focus on priority areas to make sure that you have the biggest impact first. All right. So simple do's and don'ts. So now we get into kind of the fun stuff. I'm a big believer in by learning from others' mistakes, you can be that much smarter in your own life. So if anyone's looked at the headlines recently, and I pulled all these headlines yesterday, there's been a lot of press around ransomware attacks and what the trends have been, especially in light of COVID. At first it was get your COVID statistics on case numbers. Then it was get your testing kits, and now it's go get your vaccine. So there's all these hackers and scammers taking advantage of what's top of mind for consumers today. And we're seeing the impact of that in terms of the cyber attack numbers. And then similarly, a couple months ago, you probably would have heard about the very public SolarWinds attack. And that was a supply chain attack that affected a piece of software that's used by many, many companies to remotely access and manage servers and other IT equipment. And by infecting that one supplier, software manufacturer, they were able to get into thousands of other companies who use that software unknowing and didn't know that software was infected with malware. And so you might ask yourself, well, if these large companies who are really smart and have lots of really good engineers and big budgets are getting hacked, and the government is getting hacked, what hope is there for me as a small business? And I would tell you that the numbers are certainly not, they don't give you the warm and fuzzies, I guess I'll say. So this is a chart from the FBI Internet Crime Complaint Center, so the IC3. It's from 2019 because their 2020 report hasn't been published yet. But what I would tell you as a takeaway is that there's a number of different types of attacks. I think you'd be surprised. I was surprised to see how many were here. And that there's a couple of big themes to those attacks. And the first one being phishing. And phishing, vishing, smishing, it's all variations of the same thing, which is that there's a phony email or text message or a phone call that you're getting that seems to be from a legitimate source, but that is ultimately to trick you into visiting a bad website, clicking on a bad link, or opening a bad attachment. So this is the number one way that computers are being infected today. And it is often the step one in a multi-series of steps for how companies are being infiltrated and taken over. So in the examples you can see there's one from Microsoft saying, hey, there's some unusual activity, click this button to review. Don't click the button. There's another one from LinkedIn where it's purporting to be from your bank, right? Click this link to approve your, or to secure your key. And then down here, PayPal, this one actually looks pretty convincing, where they want you to go visit their website and log in. And if you do log in, they will steal your credentials in kind of a best case scenario. And in a worst case scenario, they will infect your machine with malware. Oftentimes these attacks are so cleverly structured that they will, after you log in, they will redirect you to the correct site, the legitimate site. So you never even know anything was amiss. But all the while, the attackers have your credentials. So the best way to avoid this is make sure that you hover over links before you click on them, although even that is not foolproof. But by hovering over a link, it should show you what the URL bar is, what the URL destination is for that link. And I say that it's not foolproof because you get to that site and there's nothing to prevent that site from redirecting you to a third site. And so you wouldn't really know that just by hovering over the link. So the lesson is don't click on the link. So if you see a communication from your bank or from PayPal or Netflix or Microsoft or whomever, if you want to log into your account, type in the address of the website directly, log into it the way you normally would, but don't do it from the email. Same thing if you were to receive a communication from maybe a friend or a family member, right? So it looks legitimate, but they're asking you to buy a gift card or send them some money or click this link to do whatever. If you're ever unsure, it's best to call them to verify that they actually did send you that information. And those little steps, I know they take a little bit of time and can be a little bit annoying, but they will absolutely save you from many of these phishing attacks. Here's an example of a real world email that I received, but I thought it was a perfect example of what we're talking about. So this is also phishing. But the tactic is a domain expiration scam. So the idea is, you have a website, and so that's, mywebsite.com, and you pay somebody, a domain registrar, like GoDaddy or Cheap Domains or something like that, Namecheap, to register that domain and host your website. Now, this scam is saying that we failed to pay our renewal, and so our domain will be shut down within 24 hours. So right away, first red flag, right? Something really urgent, time sensitive. But the other thing that I thought was really interesting was it's also pretty unprofessional. There's lots of caps, there's lots of yelling. But down here, it basically says the submission link, the payment link, will expire within 24 hours. And no legitimate company is going to tell you that you can only pay me for the next 24 hours and I don't want your payment 48 hours from now or a week from now. They would be very happy to take your website down, but still accept payment and bring it back up once you've paid. So, and then the last thing I would say that made this suspicious are actually two things. One is that the domain registration is something called Domain World. I know that we don't register our domain through them, and also that it didn't expire in January. It renews at a different time of year. So immediately I was able to look at this and say, I know that it's bogus. But also the email came to us through a contact form on our website. So it wasn't that they actually had the email address that was on file. They're scamming webs back to WordPress hacks, right? Someone mentioned that earlier. They're putting these phishing emails in WordPress contact forms because they know it gets to a human, because they know that most websites are going to want to monitor customers or prospective customers communicating through a contact us page. All right, so then here's another one, malvertising. So this is a combination of malicious advertising. We come up with all these great words in the tech industry. But so here's when you click on a legitimate looking ad that you think is going to take you to a reputable website, but instead it's going to take you to a website that a hacker controls. And so what's really tricky about this is that Google has been known to show some of these ads, although they have a pretty good process for how they review ads for security. But also sites like CNN or some other news service or any site that hosts ads can have a malicious ad displayed and not really know it. So in this example, this actually got a lot of press recently, and you can click the link. We'll get the materials out to you so you can click at all these links and read more. But Home Depot had a very convincing ad spoofed on them, where the real link's down here. But if you were to search Home Depot in Google, the very first result is an ad, and it's labeled as such, but a lot of people don't pay attention to that, and they just click the first link. And clicking on this link actually took users to a different site where they were presented with a whole bunch of pop-ups and really scary messages that basically said, your machine is infected with a whole bunch of stuff. Click here to be contacted by a support representative, and we'll help you clean it up. And so that's a classic tech support scam, where they basically infect your computer to get paid to clean it up. And we'll talk about that on the next page. But the thing I would tell you about ads is that image-based ads can hide malware inside of them. So in some cases, even by loading the ad image in your browser, your machine can get infected. You don't even have to click on it in some cases. And that in general, it would be good to block advertising wherever possible. So in your antivirus settings, there's often a ad blocking feature that you can turn on. So I would encourage you to go check that. And also at the firewall level, if you have a smart firewall for your home, and a firewall is basically think about it like a security guard sitting at the entrance of the internet to your home, and it's making sure that all of the traffic going in and out is approved and safe and good. And so if you have a smart firewall, there's often an option that you can check there to also block ads. It'll block all ads because it's not able to dynamically tell if it's malicious or not, but that's usually a good idea. It'll also help your machine run a little faster too, less stuff to load in the background. All right, so tech support scams. This is most commonly, you hear a lot of examples of Microsoft or Apple, right? Calling somebody up, telling you, hey, we noticed that there's an issue on your account or your machine is slow. And inevitably, sometimes people's machines are running slow. So they're like, all right, this sounds legit. What I would tell you is that a large company like that is never going to proactively call you out of their millions and millions of customers to say, hey, we noticed a problem. And sometimes these don't come from big names like Microsoft or Apple, but it's, some smaller tech company will say, hey, we noticed something unusual on your account, or we see the pop-up scam that we were just talking about, and they will ask for remote access to your machine to fix the problem. So when you pay them to fix the issue, one, they obviously now have your payment information and can charge you a whole bunch of money for services that maybe they never provide. But also in a worst case scenario, they're going to install real malware on your machine and then ask you to either pay them more money to remove it, or they would be stealing the information on your computer. So then they have access to everything once they are remoted in. I spoke to a gentleman who actually was on the last instance of this SCORE webinar that I did. He contacted me afterwards. He was an attendee. He contacted me afterwards and said he fell victim to one of these tech support scams. He had let the technician, who had a foreign accent, by the way, not to say that they will always, but again, like kind of another potential flag, that he let them into the computer. He paid them, I think it was $250 or something like that to fix something. It seemed to be better, but then a week or two later, he had more issues because they had installed malware. And they called him again to fix it. And he said, you know what, I don't feel comfortable with this. I'm not going to pay you. And when he told them that he wasn't going to pay them, they then locked him out of his machine. So he wasn't able to get into his machine anymore. He actually had to have it completely rebuilt in order to use it again. So this stuff happens. This isn't just stories you read on the internet. These are real people. And then here's a old school example. This is actually a mailed invoice of a business directory scam. But I'll tell you again, as a small business owner, I get these all the time. So somebody calls up and says, hey, we're with Google or Alexa, or name your business directory. We just want to verify some information about your company. Are you still at this address? Is your phone number still this? What are your operating hours? I actually got that one today. We're from Google Maps or something like that. And we want to make sure that we have your operating hours up to date. I said, no, thank you. We manage that ourselves online. Don't need your service. But what's happening, if you do give them information, they will bill you for a directory listing in either a fake directory or maybe a very limited directory that they only print and send to the people who've paid them. And it's usually for a couple $100, and they're very hard to get rid of. They will continue to come after you for these services for a listing that you never even realized was paid. And then there's vanity awards. I don't know if anyone's had one of these emails before, but again, this is a real life one that I've gotten where, oh, congratulations, you've been shortlisted or selected to this accolade. But in order to receive your award, you need to pay some amount of money, in this case, $3,000 for a reprint package. And, oh, we'll interview you and feature you in the magazine that goes to 70,000 people or something like that. And I saw a comment, yes, I'll be sharing the slides through email. So don't fall for these. Of course, they're preying again on human emotion. Who doesn't want an award, something great that you could post on your social media feed? But the reality is that even though going in that this is a bit of a scam, because some people do it, they choose to do it as a marketing tool, I guess. But that's a lot to pay for a publication that nobody's heard of, and that probably the only people looking at it are other people who paid. So there's a lot of different varieties of these types of scams. And then this one is actually really, really concerning, and the video link on this one is awesome, so you have to watch it. But it's about stolen brand identity. So in this case, you're not losing any money directly, but this is when your business's name, web address, logo, address, what have you, is being used by scammers to impersonate you. So legitimate clients think they're transacting with your company. They're going to complete a checkout. They're going to provide sensitive information. They're going to log into the website, only to have those credentials stolen and or their machines infected with malware. And so unfortunately, because of the way that this kind of an attack is structured, there's no way for the customers to understand that this isn't really you. It looks like you, but it's not you. And so your brand reputation really suffers, and therefore your clients get upset, and if you think about how much there is on social media today with public reviews and things like that, one or two disgruntled customers who believe that your company was responsible for scamming them out of their money, they're going to take to the airwaves and broadcast that everywhere, and that can be very costly to try to reverse and undo. The video is really, really cool. It's from Hiscox Insurance, and it takes everything that happens online, but they recreate it in the physical world. So just to give you a little preview of what the video is, it's a bike store, and then across the street, another bike store opens with the same products, the same sign, the same logo, the same everything, and they start stealing the deliveries because the delivery truck person doesn't really pay much attention, doesn't realize, and so it's brilliantly done. You got to watch it. All right, so then you've probably also heard about a BEC, a business email compromise scam, and this is where a email is sent to somebody, usually in accounts payable or whoever's responsible for the bills, saying, oh, here's a urgent invoice, please pay it right away. And oftentimes it's followed up by like a note from the CEO that says, take care of this for me. I don't have time to talk about it right now, but just do it and I'll call you later. And I have a client, I have a lot who they wired, it's a construction company, they wired $177,000 to what they thought was a legitimate vendor of theirs. But they had, in the email, it had said, essentially, our payment information has changed. Please wire the money over here instead. So right away, your flag should be going up when there's ever a change to wire transfer information, payment details, things like that. What I would also tell you is that even if you have cybersecurity insurance, you have to be really, really careful when it comes to fraudulent invoices, because most cyber policies won't pay out for losses incurred by an act that you did. So if somebody in accounts payable pays an invoice, even if they were tricked under false pretenses and it was complete fraud, your cybersecurity insurance policy most likely isn't going to cover you for that. There are additional types of coverage and kind of add-ons that you can do, and the best way to figure out exactly what coverage you need and everything is to talk to an experienced insurance professional, which I am not. So I don't necessarily want to cross over that line, but it's definitely one that you really need to be careful of. And your best recourse, if something like this does happen and you find out that you've made a payment to an account that a hacker controls or an organization that wasn't legitimate, is to try to recoup that money through your bank. All right, and I think this is the last one, but this video is also really funny. I think it went on the late night circuit, but it's all about social engineering. So humans are curious creatures, and we like to be helpful, and we like to be friendly. And scammers can prey on that to ask you a series of innocent sounding questions, but get you to reveal things that you shouldn't. And so in this video, they start off saying, hey, we're talking about cybersecurity and how safe people's passwords are. And they ask this woman, what's one of your online passwords? And she says it's her dog's name and the year she graduated high school. And they say, oh, what kind of dog do you have? And she tells them, and she's like, what's his name? Jameson. And then, oh, and where did you go to school? Oh, what school? When did you graduate? And she tells them. And they do this again and again with like a dozen people on the street. And it shows you how susceptible we are to these types of attacks. Anyways, it's a great video to watch. All right, so how do you avoid these kinds of attacks? What lessons can you take from all of these? I think first one is that common sense always prevails. Right? If you're not sure if an email is legit, if a phone call is legit, go check with someone else who would. I certainly put it out there that you can reach me on social media, you can call me in my office. I'd be happy to give you an opinion on something. If you're looking at it going, I'm not sure how I feel about this, the invitation is open. Secondly, don't click on ads or links. Visit websites directly. Be really careful when you go through search results. The first 3 or 4 results are often ads. You want to get past those to see the legitimate website results below that. Never give out personal information or business information over the phone, even if it seems innocent, because you never know what that piece of info that you just told somebody, how that can be married up with other information that's out there on the public internet about you and about your company to reverse engineer a password or something else. So just be really careful about that type of stuff. Always, if you're asked to send payment information or send a payment rather to a new bank account or to wire it someplace, it's always a good practice to call the recipient and verbally read back the wire instructions to make sure that your email hasn't been intercepted and those details replaced with a hacker's account. A lot of times when accounts are compromised, attackers don't exploit them right away. They linger and they watch and they learn about the behaviors of the organization. They can figure out who has what role, who has access to what type of information, so that they can craft a very thoughtful and careful set of emails or communications that will trick you into doing what they want you to do. And then the last piece is to use multi-factor authentication wherever it is offered. So multi-factor authentication just means that when you're verifying your identity, you're using more than one method to do that. So that's usually a combination of something you know, like a password, and something you have, which is an authentication key. So that's it for kind of how to mitigate these in terms of behavior. I just noticed that we're about 5 minutes over, so I guess this is we're probably a bit out of time. I had a couple of more pieces of information, but I can save them for part 2, which we're going to do next week. I just wanted to check in, Tegan, with you.
So we could go, I don't know how much longer. We could do like 10 minutes more. Okay. Or if it goes longer, we can save it for part 2 next week.
Perfect. Well, I would say anybody in the chat who has to run, if you could just let me know, and then I can always follow up with you individually or something afterwards, but I'll try to move through the rest of it really fast. All right. So this chart will cover a lot of what we're going to talk about in parts 2 and 3. So I wanted to throw it up here just so that you know. The only thing I would say is number 3, the creating a cybersecurity plan and how to respond to a cybersecurity attack. That is specifically the topic for part 3, which will be on March 17th. Everything else we'll talk about next Wednesday. And then lastly, to kind of wrap it up, the best way to prevent an attack or to build up your defenses is to plan. And so good security planning requires multiple layers of defense. Just like a castle has a moat and walls and inner walls and watchtowers, you need to build something similar for your security environment. And so in the industry, we call this defense in depth, which means that you have multiple layers, kind of like an onion, where even if one layer fails, you have these other layers that are going to protect you. And if you think about how we do things for your home, home security, right? You've got doors, then locks, then windows, and an alarm. On the data security side, you have a network firewall, you have accounts and passwords, you have software patches, antivirus, cybersecurity insurance, backups, things like that. So always think about layered defenses where the thing that is most important to the success of your business is in the middle. And they tell you that the best way to protect data security is to get rid of all the humans, because humans often make mistakes and humans can be socially engineered. But plan B is to train them. So security awareness training is essential. Back to all the scams that we just talked about. Your policies need to set really clear expectations for how your users are going to protect the information and the accounts that they have access to. But also prevention is not enough, right? You can spend all the money in the world and still nothing is 100% bulletproof. Anyone who tells you that they can guarantee that you'll never be hacked, you'll never have an attack, is either really naive or they're being dishonest with you. So an equal part of your focus in any type of security plan is your detection and response to incidents. And so that is why we're dedicating an entire hour to that in week 3. But the other important thing that you can do is make sure that you have a solid resiliency strategy. So if you plan for an attack, if you expect it to happen, then you'll already be prepared and know what to do when the event occurs. So going back to our story about that large company that had backups but hadn't tested them, hadn't practiced them, didn't think through all of the different scenarios for, in a real life situation, what would be required to recover, they found themselves in a world of hurt. And as Tim Ferriss likes to say, you can fail at plenty as long as you get a few things right. And so, and I'm in the backup industry, so of course I feel this way, but I would tell you that having backups is your single best line of defense against a cyber attack, because you can't prevent everything, but at least you can recover. And so you want to make sure that you have, just like a mountain climber, right, fixed restore points where you know that if something happened, you're only losing a known amount of ground, and that you're able to say that, you know, I have my tolerance for loss fits within that window, and it's something you can test, and it's something that you can practice. So I'll quickly run through this, but here's an example of why backups are important. So everything's good on Friday, ransomware strikes on Saturday, nobody notices it until Monday, but we have a backup. So on Monday at 9 a.m., in the course of an hour, you can restore your data back to the state that it was in prior to that ransomware attack. It's basically like reversing it as if it never happened. But you can only do that if you have the right type of and well-managed data backups. And so back to that large company that had issues with theirs, I would tell you that they were partially following the golden rule, but not entirely. So in the industry, the golden rule is that you need 3 copies of your data. If it's important, you need 3 copies, because 2 is not enough. You want to store that on at least 2 different types of storage media. So maybe a hard drive and a USB flash drive, or local and in the cloud. And then at least one of those copies should be completely offsite and off network. So if you did get a network infection, it would be less likely to corrupt all 3 of your copies, especially the one that has been totally removed. And then increasingly, I would tell you that there's a couple more numbers that we need to add to the equation. And one is that your backups are completely immutable. They cannot be edited, they cannot be changed, they are locked and frozen in time. And this is the prime reason why you should never use a cloud syncing tool or rely on file syncing as a method of backup, because if you have any kind of corruption, those corrupted data bits will sync and corrupt your backup copy. And this is what happened to that large company, right? Their database, the index of their backups was affected by ransomware. And then lastly, with anything, you can't just set it and forget it. You have to monitor for errors. And so when you follow the 32110 rule, you have good protection against your backups. And like the little asterisk is, you have to make sure that your passwords are accessible after a disaster if you do encrypt your data. All right, so in summary, we'll breeze through this. So you've got a lot riding in your business. You're only as strong as your weakest link. And hope is not a strategy. Hackers only need to be lucky once. You need to be lucky every time, which is why you need layers of protection and solid restore points, a solid backup for recovery. If you want to learn more, I would be happy to meet with you or connect on LinkedIn. And I do have 2 groups that I manage, one in Facebook and one in LinkedIn, where I try to share tech tips on a weekly basis. So little snippets that'll help you in your day-to-day life. And then at the bottom, we've got the sessions for next Wednesday and the Wednesday after that, so you know what we'll be covering. And we'll do it at the same time, 12 to 1.
All right, thank you, Kathy. So we have, I think we have two main questions.
Okay.
Leanne had written, she asked, what do you do when you have an employee hacker or when you have an insider hacker?
Great question. Some of the most difficult cases, primarily because an insider can tamper with your backups and destroy them, and also knows their way around your systems. So if there's a specific situation that you have been facing or anything like that, feel free to message me privately. But what I would say is, with an insider threat, first thing you want to do is shut off their access. So disable all of their accounts, lock them out of your systems. If you are able to take a sneaky backup of their PC and anything that was running on it, and you might need that for evidence, if you were to ever press charges or things like that, you're going to want to do that as well. I would make sure that you save all logs from your systems. Saving a history of activity of anything that was created, edited, or changed. That way, again, if you go into file charges and need to do an investigation, you'll have data that proves the chain of activities and kind of who did what. But yes, insider threats are some of the most difficult to identify because they know how to cover their tracks and also remediate.
All right. Okay. So Brian asked, how likely are 20-character passwords stored in a password manager to be hacked? How likely are they to be hacked?
Very unlikely. And I love that you're using a password manager. So Brian, you get some extra points for that. There's a chart, I'll have to find it. I'm gonna make a little note. There's a chart that basically says based on the length of the password and the complexity in terms of uppercase, lowercase, numbers, symbols, how long would it take a program to brute force break that password and crack it? So offhand, I don't know how long it would take, but I could go take a look for you. But definitely for passwords, the longer is the better. The more combinations of characters, the better. Don't use dictionary words. My best recommendation is either use an auto-generated secure password from your password manager. They all have that little feature. Or if you do have to actually think of one yourself, come up with a song or a quote or a phrase, and maybe use the first letters of that memorable phrase as your password, and then also get creative and substitute some characters. So you can use an exclamation point for an I, or the @ symbol for an A, right? Do something clever, and you'll be in a good spot.
Okay, that's good. I'm going to use that too. Okay, so Maria asked, is cloud backup safe?
Yes, it depends on who you're with, like anything. So I would recommend two things. Some people say cloud backup, and they mean something different than what I would consider a backup. So if you want to type in the chat, kind of give me an example of a specific tool, that would be great. But what I would tell you is, so long as your cloud backup is immutable, meaning once it's written, you're not automatically syncing changes, you're not using Google Drive or OneDrive or Dropbox as your cloud backup. If it's a true backup provider, and there's many household names that are out there, then you should be in decent shape. But just like anything, the technology itself is one component. You have to make sure that you're adequately protecting the username and the password that you use to access that backup, right? Because if you lose that, or if you use a very weak password, then your protections are not that good. And you have to make sure that you have a good retention history, a retention policy on those backups. So I find people who are trying to save a little bit of money on data storage, they would do a cloud backup, but only want to keep it for 2 days, 3 days. And what I would tell them is, are you confident that you are going to detect every single potential threat, or just I accidentally deleted a file within 2 or 3 days? We would recommend 14 days as kind of a minimum. And that way, if you're on vacation, if you're not paying attention, you still have a cushion of history of good data prior to the date of any likely infection.
Okay. Michelle asked, what's the risk of using a keychain for passwords? Is that like a password manager? Is it better with or without?
Yeah, so I see that. What's the risk of using a key for passwords? If what you're talking about is like a USB security key, I would actually say that that's great, because it's a physical thing that you hold.
I think it's Apple Keychain. Is that, I think she's talking
All right,
about.
so I'm not a Mac person, that's the first thing I'll say. But I believe that's Apple's version of kind of a password manager. So I would say that keychain is probably going to be better than alternatives like writing passwords in a notebook or saving them in a digital file in your machine. I can't speak for keychain specifically. I'm just not as familiar with it myself. But I would compare this question to one I get a lot, which is, well, should I save my passwords in my browser, right? Chrome and Safari and others offer to save those for you. And what I would say is that while the makers of the browsers and Apple, right, are large tech companies that are very savvy in terms of security, they're doing a lot of things, meaning, and I'll just use the browser as an example. So the browser, it has historically been pretty insecure, although in recent years they've gotten better. And secure password management is just one tiny element of what the browser's doing overall. And I would kind of say the same thing for Macs, right? Like if that's one tiny component of the overall Mac operating system. And I'm a big fan of always using purpose-built security tools. So if you used a password manager from a company that's all they do is just security, right? They're optimized, their whole business model is built around the security and the trust and the reliability of that password manager. It's kind of hard to go wrong. So I don't know of any issues with Keychain per se, but just maybe something to keep in mind. But I think you're probably doing a lot more than many others are. So keep up the good work.
All right. So we have two, I think, related questions. So Angela asked, will future workshops cover how to choose an antivirus protection provider for small business?
Yes. We'll talk about things to look for, especially since this is through SCORE. I don't want to recommend a particular brand or type, but I will cover what to look for and kind of how to compare them against one another.
All right. And I think, Brian, does that answer your question? Because he asked, what firewall software do we recommend for Windows?
So I would say that it's probably going to be a slightly different question. If you're using Windows, there is Windows Firewall that's there that you can just turn on. So that's always kind of a good option. It doesn't cost you anything. But if you have a question about specific PC related firewall software, I would say maybe message me afterwards and we can chat about that one. And I can make sure too that any of the questions that we didn't answer here get incorporated into next week's session. That's the cool thing about these 3-part series.
Okay. And then Brian, follow up. So is the built-in software sufficient?
Yes, but just like anything, it all comes down to the settings. So there's with security and IT in general, there's always kind of an it depends answer. So buying or installing or turning on anything in and of itself doesn't always get you all the way there in terms of security. But it's how you configure it, what security policies you allow that really determines the level of protection that you're going to get. But yes, using Windows Firewall is certainly fine for your PC. I would say though that people sometimes confuse that with a network firewall, which is going to protect your network. So back to layers of the onion, you want to have a security guard standing at the front door of your home network, right, before things enter your home. And then of course you also want a sentinel on your machine, watching your machine and making sure that unauthorized software doesn't execute on the machine itself. But you want those 2 layers of protection, and they are completely different. We can talk about network firewalls on the next call.
Okay. So Michelle, you have your hand up. Did you have another question? I don't see it anywhere, but I want to check before we log off. So we'll give it a sec to see if she types.
These are great questions, by the way, guys. I love it.
All right. So I didn't hear from Michelle. So Michelle, if you still have a question, please send Kathy or me an email. I'll get it to Kathy if you send it to me. But that's all. If anyone else has any other questions, please put it in the chat now. Otherwise, I would say we'll see you guys next week.